This is a pivotal moment in global history. We are witnessing the first modern infrastructural war of the 21st century, where the targets aren't just military bases, but the very water and fuel that keep civilization alive. Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Monday, March 9, 2026.
The velocity of these events is, it's staggering. We are looking at a fundamental reordering of global power dynamics unfolding in real time, and the ripple effects are, they're already tearing through global markets.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission of our deep dive today is to uncover the hidden truths behind the rapidly escalating conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. We are now entering the 8th or 9th day of this war, depending on how you mark the initial escalations, and the sheer volume of data we have to sift through is massive.
It really is.
We are going to explore the stark military realities on the ground, the staggering economic fallout that is already hitting your wallet, and the explosive domestic political scandals operating right in the background of this geopolitical crisis. Right.
But before we dive in, I need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener. The reports and analysis we are examining today contain highly charged political claims, originating from both left-wing and right-wing perspectives. The Hot News Channel takes no sides. We do not endorse any specific viewpoints, administrations, or political figures. Our sole objective is to strictly impart the factual data, the timelines, and the claims exactly as they are presented in the original materials to help you understand the full, unvarnished picture.
That's vital context. Because, look, the contrast between the official declarations coming out of Washington and the granular data emerging from the theater of operations is widening by the hour. We are looking at a scenario where the information space is being aggressively managed, but the sheer sprawling scale of the conflict is, it's making that management impossible to sustain. That's the core tension we need to examine first. If you listen to the official U.S. narrative right now, this is Operation Epic Fury. The administration is publicly demanding unconditional surrender from Tehran. They are essentially claiming total victory, suggesting the Iranian regime is on the brink of collapse and their military is permanently degraded.
Yes, that is the official line.
But when you start looking at the hard metrics of warfare, that narrative fractures. Take casualties, for example. The official U.S. count of service members killed in action currently stands at 6. We saw the dignified transfer of these 6 individuals at Dover Air Force Base.
Right, an event that became a major political flashpoint itself, considering the commander-in-chief attended wearing a $55 campaign baseball cap and refused to remove it as the caskets passed.
The optics were terrible. But let's look past the optics to the math. Iran is publicly claiming that 220 U.S. soldiers were killed in a single 24-hour period. I know we expect adversaries to inflate numbers during a conflict, but there is corroborating data coming out of Europe that paints a very different picture than the official count of 6. What are the logistics networks telling us?
If you want to know the true human cost of a modern American conflict, you don't look at press briefings. You look at the medical evacuation logistics. The primary hub for American wounded coming out of the Middle East is the Regional Medical Center in Landstuhl, Germany.
That's near the Kaiserslautern base.
Exactly. Situated right near the Kaiserslautern military base.
Yeah.
It is the largest American hospital outside the United States. Over the past few days, Landstuhl hasn't just been busy. They have issued urgent, base-wide notices for emergency blood drives. And more tellingly, the hospital abruptly announced the cancellation of all routine pregnancy and maternity services.
Oh.
They stated explicitly that they must clear their wards to focus entirely on their primary mission.
You don't clear maternity wards and shut down routine care for 6 casualties?
Exactly, you just don't. When a level 2 trauma center of that size shifts into mass casualty operational footing, it indicates they are bracing for or actively receiving a massive influx of critical patients. We are seeing independent reports surfacing from medical networks around Stuttgart suggesting there are upwards of 600 American casualties so far.
600. That is a massive discrepancy. And there's another claim out there that sounds almost too massive to comprehend. Iranian officials are stating highly specifically that 173 U.S. Delta Force personnel have been captured and are currently being held as prisoners of war. We're talking about Tier 1 special operators here.
I am highly skeptical of that exact number, honestly. In the absolute chaos of a decentralized battle space, verifying the coordinated capture of 173 elite operators without a massive, visible firefight or immediate digital leak is notoriously difficult. The Pentagon, predictably, denies this entirely.
Yeah.
However, we cannot ignore the behavior of the military apparatus back home. Military analysts embedded near Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is the home of Joint Special Operations Command, are noting highly unusual operational footprints.
What kind of footprints?
There is a complete unprecedented lockdown of information regarding deployed units, even to immediate family members.
So even if it's not exactly 173, the suppression of the data is the red flag.
It is a documented historical tactic. Look at the Vietnam War. The military continuously minimized American casualties and mathematically maximized enemy body counts to maintain the illusion of control for the domestic audience. That held together right up until the Tet Offensive shattered the facade. The absolute lockdown of Fort Bragg suggests they are managing a crisis that severely contradicts the epic Fury victory narrative.
I was reading through the equipment analysis by Larry Johnson, the former intelligence analyst, and the hardware losses he outlines are staggering. He estimates the U.S. has lost $5 billion in highly advanced radar equipment in just the first week. Specifically, the destruction of 5 massive radar installations, including the AN/FPS-132 and AN/TSP systems. I don't think people realize the scale of these systems. They aren't just, satellite dishes on a truck, right?
Not at all. The AN/FPS-132 is a colossal multi-story structure. It is an upgraded early warning radar. It costs roughly $1 billion to construct, and it is a foundational node in Washington's global missile shield, meant to scan the horizon from Europe to the Indian Ocean. There were only about 6 of these in existence worldwide.
Only 6 in the world.
Yes. Losing even one is a catastrophic strategic blow. Losing multiple systems effectively blinds the regional architecture.
Why are they so critical mechanically? I mean, what happens when those screens go dark?
It's all about physics and reaction time. Iran's strategy here is a highly calculated war of attrition. By blinding those specific early warning systems, they compress the reaction window for American and Israeli air defenses. Previously, with the AN/FPS-132 active, you might have a 15 to 30-minute warning of an incoming ballistic missile. You can track its trajectory the moment it clears the atmosphere. Now, reports indicate that warning window has collapsed to barely 1 or 2 minutes.
Which means the actual interceptors have to fire almost blindly. And that brings us to the missile defenses themselves. According to the analysis by Larry Johnson, he points out that Iran has successfully destroyed 3 U.S. Haddad missile defense batteries. When you look at the defense industrial base, this is where the math goes completely off the rails.
Oh, the math is brutal.
It is. The U.S. only produces about 79 THAAD interceptors a year. They run about $13 million apiece. And for the Patriot PAX-3 missiles, the annual production is roughly 620 units at around $5 million each. So we are firing $13 million interceptors to take out drone swarms that cost about as much as a fully loaded Honda Civic. I don't need a degree in economics to know that is a fast track to bankruptcy.
It is the textbook definition of asymmetric warfare. You bleed the superpower financially before you bleed them militarily. But the situation with the missile defenses is actually far worse than a simple burn rate of expensive inventory. We have to look at the research by Ted Postal. He is a prominent specialist in nuclear weapons delivery systems and missile defense out of MIT. His data suggests that the U.S. missile defense systems, particularly the Patriots, are suffering from massive systemic failure rates.
Wait, failure rates? But we see the visuals on the news every night of the bright flashes in the sky. They look like successful intercepts.
And that is the danger of relying on visual optics over forensic data. Postal analyzed this phenomenon extensively, tracing back to similar issues during the 1991 Gulf War. His analysis reveals that what the military often categorizes as a successful intercept, that bright flash caught on camera over a city, is frequently just the Patriot interceptor detonating its own warhead in empty space after missing the incoming target.
How does that happen?
The Patriot uses a proximity fuse. If it thinks it's close enough, it explodes to create a wall of shrapnel. But frequently, the incoming ballistic missile simply flies right through that debris cloud unharmed and hits its target, while the camera only registers the defensive explosion in the sky.
So it creates a completely false sense of security. The public, and maybe even the commanders on the ground, believe this multi-billion-dollar shield is impenetrable, while the actual ordnance is slipping right through.
Precisely. It masks the degradation of the defensive perimeter,
Which leaves the personnel on the ground completely exposed. There's a story circulating that perfectly illustrates this total breakdown of institutional protection. Major General Randy Manner, the former acting vice chief of the National Guard Bureau, found himself stranded in Dubai as this conflict erupted, and the commercial airspace essentially became a free fire zone. This is a 2-star general with decades of service.
Right.
Yet he publicly reported feeling totally abandoned by the U.S. government. The embassies immediately went into lockdown survival mode. The State Department website effectively told stranded Americans, including high-ranking military personnel, that they were on their own. He described sitting on a civilian aircraft making 4 different attempts to take off. You have 100 cell phones suddenly blaring incoming missile alerts on the tarmac, women and children crying in panic. When they finally managed to get airborne on the 4th attempt, it wasn't the U.S. Air Force that protected them. They had to be escorted out of the combat zone by UAE F-16 fighter jets.
That is a staggering image.
It really makes you wonder, imagine hearing your leaders declare absolute victory while simultaneously watching your nation's most advanced defense systems evaporate overnight. Who do you trust when the television says victory is at hand, but a major general has to hitch a ride under a foreign military's escort just to survive?
That dissonance is the defining characteristic of this conflict so far. The strategic communication from the top is completely decoupled from the tactical reality on the ground. And because the air defenses are failing and the radar is blinded, the collateral damage is aggressively moving from the battlefield straight into the global economy. The nature of this war fundamentally shifted over the weekend.
We're seeing a pivot to scorched earth infrastructure targeting. The conflict has moved beyond military bases to the very water, fuel, and logistics that keep these nations alive. U.S. and Israeli forces heavily bombed Iranian oil storage depots and refining facilities in southern Tehran. The visuals are apocalyptic. You have reports of Iranians waking up to skies that are pitch black. Thick, toxic plumes of smoke are blotting out the sun. People are wiping their cars and finding their hands coated in thick grease. It is literally raining oil and ash over major population centers. And crucially, the U.S. allegedly struck an Iranian water desalination plant.
Hitting a desalination facility is a massive escalation. Frankly, it is a strategic miscalculation of epic proportions. When you target water infrastructure in the Middle East, you are opening a Pandora's box of existential retaliation. Iran's immediate response demonstrated exactly this principle. They didn't just hit another military base. They retaliated by launching ballistic missiles directly at Israel's main oil refinery in Haifa.
And that single facility supplies over 50% of Israel's entire civilian and military fuel needs.
Right. And Iran didn't stop there. They responded to the water infrastructure attack in kind by striking a desalination facility in Bahrain. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is an infrastructural death spiral. The Gulf states Bahrain, the UAE, Qatar do not have vast natural freshwater aquifers. Their entire modern existence is predicated on massive, energy-intensive, reverse osmosis desalination plants pulling seawater from the Gulf.
So you cut that off, and what happens?
You take those intake pipes offline, and within days, you don't just have an economic crisis, you have an unmitigated humanitarian catastrophe.
Right.
Without desalination, the Gulf has no drinking water, period. Current reports indicate that Dubai, which is a global hub of commerce and tourism, has only a 7-day supply of fresh food left because commercial shipping in the area has completely frozen.
Let's talk about how that freeze is slamming into the United States. The hard economic data is brutal. Oil hit $91 a barrel on Friday. It's aggressively climbing toward $100 and beyond. Over just the last week, U.S. gas prices jumped 11% to an average of $3.32 a gallon. Diesel, which is the absolute lifeblood of the American freight and logistics network, is up 15%, hitting $4.33 a gallon. And this is all compounding while the broader economy falters. The U.S. unexpectedly lost 92,000 jobs in February. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is burning through an estimated $1 billion a day to fund this operation.
It is entirely unsustainable.
But I have to stop you there. We hear politicians constantly claim the U.S. is energy independent, so why does a regional flare-up 6,000 miles away immediately spike gas prices in Ohio? That doesn't track.
It sounds contradictory, but energy independence is mostly a political marketing buzzword. The reality of the globalized capitalist system operates entirely differently, and the economic analysis by Henrietta Trez and geopolitical analyst Alexander Mercouris breaks this down perfectly. Yes, the United States physically produces a massive volume of crude oil domestically, but the price of that oil is not set by a closed American loop. It is set on the global commodity market.
Right.
When the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, the global supply of oil drops drastically. And it's closed right now because of soaring maritime insurance premiums. Underwriters at Lloyd's of London simply will not insure massive commercial tankers sailing through a war zone where anti-ship missiles are flying. Without insurance, the ships don't sail.
So the global supply shrinks, and because oil is a global commodity, the price of the oil pumped in Texas still shoots up to match the global panic.
Exactly. But Henrietta Trez's analysis goes deeper into the mechanics of why this hurts the average consumer beyond just filling up their car. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just about crude oil. It is a critical transit artery for liquid natural gas coming out of Qatar, and it is absolutely vital for global fertilizer shipments. If the supply of fertilizer is choked off, the price spikes. When fertilizer prices spike, the cost of growing every single calorie of food in the American Midwest spikes.
According to the analysis by Alexander Mercuris, he also points out the severe vulnerabilities in the global financial derivatives market. How does a burning refinery in Haifa trigger a financial crisis on Wall Street?
Think of the global energy derivatives market like a massive interconnected casino where Wall Street hedge funds and institutional investors place leveraged bets on the future price of oil. These are paper contracts, not physical barrels of oil. When the actual physical price of oil violently spikes because a refinery blows up or a strait is closed, the underlying value of those massive financial bets is threatened. The house essentially demands more cash to cover those volatile bets immediately. This is called a margin call.
And if they don't have the cash?
If the traders don't have the liquid cash on hand, they are forced into cascading liquidations. They have to sell off other assets like tech stocks or treasury bonds just to cover their energy bets. A sudden violent shock to energy infrastructure in the Middle East threatens to trigger a contagion effect that can crash entirely unrelated sectors of the stock market.
And that sheer systemic financial terror is leading to some truly surreal policy pivots in Washington. There is a surprising fact emerging that shows just how panicked the administration is behind closed doors. The U.S. Treasury, specifically under the guidance of Scott Bessent, is quietly moving to lift sanctions on Russian oil.
Which is incredible when you think about it.
Just weeks ago, the U.S. was aggressively threatening India with secondary sanctions for daring to buy Russian crude. Now, because the American consumer is facing an energy meltdown caused by a war the U.S. just initiated, the Treasury is not only allowing India to buy Russian oil, they are actively considering lifting sanctions on the entire Russian shadow fleet, those uninsured tankers running with dark transponders, just to get more crude supply onto the global market.
The irony is profound. A war that was theoretically launched to project unassailable American strength and secure dominance in the Middle East is now directly enriching the Russian Federation. Mechanically speaking, Russia requires an oil price of roughly $56 a barrel to fund its state operations and sustain its ongoing conflict in Ukraine. With oil rocketing past $90 a barrel because of this Middle Eastern escalation, this conflict is an economic godsend for Moscow. It is simultaneously draining U.S. military stockpiles, distracting Western media and political capital entirely away from Eastern Europe, and overflowing the Russian treasury.
It really makes you wonder who is actually winning this grand geopolitical chess match, because the map of the world is literally being redrawn in real time. The Gulf states, who have relied on the American security umbrella for half a century, are in absolute unprecedented panic.
They are completely rethinking their alliances.
The reports we are seeing outline a total collapse of regional confidence. The government of Bahrain has reportedly fled across the King Fahd Causeway to seek refuge in Saudi Arabia as their infrastructure literally burns. Qatar's international airport in Doha, which is one of the busiest transit hubs on the planet, has completely shut down to passenger traffic, and the United Arab Emirates is visibly furious at being dragged into the crossfire. We saw a viral public statement from Khalaf al-Habtoor, a highly prominent Emirati billionaire and former diplomat, directly demanding answers from the U.S. president. He asked publicly, who gave you the authority to drag our region into a war with Iran? Who gave you permission to turn our region into a battlefield? Was this your decision or Netanyahu's pressure? The U.S. allies are realizing the American presence is no longer a protective shield. It is a giant target painted on their backs.
And geopolitics abhors a vacuum. As U.S. influence fractures and regional allies panic, other great powers are stepping directly into the fray to capitalize. We have to look at the investigative analysis by senior reporter David Rode. His reporting indicates that Russian intelligence is now actively providing Iran with highly classified targeting data.
So it's not just diplomatic backing. They are actively feeding them the coordinates.
Precisely. This is actionable, real-time intelligence allowing Iranian forces to precisely track and target U.S. ships, aircraft, and hidden bases across the entire region. The U.S. State Department is visibly alarmed because this directly threatens American service members. But diplomatically, they have almost zero leverage to stop it. We are seeing a direct mirror imaging of the Ukraine conflict. The U.S. has been providing identical targeting intelligence to Ukrainian forces to strike Russian assets for years. Now, Moscow is returning the favor in the Gulf.
But here's where the data points transition from geopolitical maneuvering to absolutely terrifying existential threats. I saw a report from George Galloway, which was subsequently corroborated by prominent Chinese military analysts. The United States has deployed the E6B Mercury to the Gulf, along with the E4C Nightwatch. For listeners who might not be familiar with these airframes, the E6B Mercury is not a troop transport. It does not drop conventional gravity bombs. It is famously known as the Doomsday Plane.
That is a critical data point that requires deep context. This raises an important question. Why deploy a nuclear command plane? The E6B Mercury is a highly specialized airborne command and control platform. Its core mission, known as TACOMO, Take Charge, and Move Out, is designed specifically to authorize, coordinate, and launch nuclear strikes if the ground-based command systems in the United States are destroyed. It trails a massive wire antenna designed to communicate directly with submerged nuclear submarines.
You do not fly a billion-dollar nuclear command infrastructure into an active, highly contested combat zone as a casual flex.
No, you do not. And this synthesizes exactly what we were discussing earlier. The massive loss of the early warning radars, the depletion of the Tod and Patriot interceptors, the glaring inability to stop cheap asymmetrical drones, swarms of chilling picture emerges. The conventional U.S. strategy of rapid regime change has utterly failed.
The administration is reportedly proposing sending 5,000 ground troops into Iran to stabilize the situation. But the math on that is absurd. Iran is a nation of 90 million people. It is a massive, mountainous fortress that survived 40 years of crippling economic sanctions and fought the Soviet-backed Iraqi army to a brutal standstill for 8 years in the 1980s. The U.S. military could not hold Afghanistan with 100,000 troops over 2 decades. Sending 5,000 troops into Iran isn't an invasion force, it's a hostage offering.
Which is exactly why the Chinese military analysts are publicly warning the world, and Beijing does not issue these types of global warnings lightly, that America has taken more damage in this conflict than at any point since the Vietnam War. Because conventional victory is now mathematically impossible without instituting a massive, politically toxic domestic draft to raise hundreds of thousands of troops, the U.S. command structure is drifting dangerously toward a nuclear escalation scenario to force a surrender. Deploying the E6B Mercury signals that the nuclear option is actively on the table because the conventional options have been exhausted.
And what does that do to the moral authority of the United States on the global stage? It puts it into free fall. Alongside the horrifying visual of the skies over Tehran raining black oil, we have to confront the staggering human cost of this escalation. Multiple reports confirm that a U.S. strike hit a girls' primary school in Iran. 171 young female students and 14 teachers were killed.
And the official response to that tragedy has been a masterclass in obfuscation that is doing catastrophic damage to America's diplomatic standing. First, there was total denial from the Pentagon. Then a quiet suggestion that perhaps a legitimate military target near the school was the actual objective. Then, officials attempted to blame the targeting parameters on artificial algorithms, essentially claiming the targeting software chose the coordinates, not the human commanders.
They blamed a computer algorithm.
Yes. When a superpower is dropping gravity bombs on civilian infrastructure and blaming computer chips for the deaths of over 100 children, it fundamentally shatters any remaining claim to upholding a rules-based international order. The Global South is watching this real-time evasion of accountability, and they are permanently reevaluating their relationship with the West.
Okay, we need to take a deep breath here. We are going to pivot to a topic that seems entirely disconnected geographically, but the timing is so precise, so incredibly specific, that it demands rigorous scrutiny.
It really does.
Once again, I want to explicitly reiterate our strict impartiality disclaimer to you, the listener. The Hot News Channel is merely examining the allegations, the legal documents, and the official federal memos present in the reports. We are not prosecutors, and we are not declaring guilt. Our job is to present the factual data operating in the background of this crisis. Right now, running concurrently with this massive Middle Eastern escalation, Washington is engulfed in the release and the alleged systemic cover-up of the Jeffrey Epstein files.
The sheer volume of missing information in this case is staggering, and it points to a profound failure of federal oversight. The Wall Street Journal and various independent investigative outlets are reporting that anywhere from 40,000 to 47,000 documents related to the Epstein investigation are either missing entirely from the federal record or actively being withheld by the Department of Justice.
Let's look at the exact timeline and the hard data surrounding this. Over the July 4th holiday weekend, which anyone in media knows is a classic Friday night news dump strategy designed specifically to bury an announcement and avoid press scrutiny, Attorney General Pam Bondi quietly issued a memo officially closing the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators. In that specific memo, Bondi explicitly stated that the DOJ found no credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals.
Right.
But newly surfaced FBI documents are tearing that narrative apart. Specifically, we are looking at the FD-302 forms. For context, an FD-302 is the official federal form used by FBI agents to summarize the interviews they conduct. It is a foundational document in any federal prosecution. These newly released 302s feature multiple interviews with a Jane Doe victim. In these highly detailed reports, this victim alleges that she was sexually assaulted by Donald Trump when she was a minor. Even more devastating to the Attorney General's memo, the victim told the FBI agents on the record that Trump and Epstein actively and openly discussed blackmailing their wealthy and powerful clients.
And here is the forensic anomaly that investigators are zeroing in on regarding these documents. The DOJ only released these specific 302 interviews because they were legally forced to, and the copies they released were clearly marked as duplicates from Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal discovery file. Mechanically, every document that went to Maxwell's defense team during her trial should have an original, pristine copy sitting in the FBI's master case file. So where are the originals? That is the multi-million-dollar question. Why are tens of thousands of documents, including explosive interviews with other victims detailing operations at international modeling agencies, still completely vanished from the DOJ's primary record?
So we have this massive overseas escalation, but we have to look at the domestic timeline happening literally on the exact same days. Is it just a coincidence that this massive Middle Eastern escalation is happening at the exact moment the House Oversight Committee is subpoenaing the Attorney General over a sex trafficking cover-up? Pam Bondi quietly closes the Epstein co-conspirator investigation over a holiday weekend, right as the House Oversight Committee is preparing subpoenas. In fact, the committee is voting with bipartisan support, including 5 Republicans, to subpoena the Attorney General over a sex trafficking cover-up involving the sitting president.
And in Washington politics, timing is absolutely everything. Geopolitical commentator Tara Reid and former White House official Anthony Scaramucci have both provided fascinating analysis on this intersection of events. Scaramucci points out the psychological profile at play. A leader who historically refuses to ever admit fault, who will double and triple down with extreme measures to control the narrative.
And what does Tara Reid's analysis add to this?
According to the analysis by Tara Reid, she points to specific, albeit redacted, email chains from the Epstein discovery where Epstein allegedly boasted that his powerful clients would sooner start a geopolitical conflict than face domestic ruin and prison time. This introduces the classic wag the dog theory into our analytical framework.
Explain that theory for the listeners.
In political science, wag the dog refers to the tactic of initiating a foreign crisis to completely consume the media cycle, unify a fractured political base through wartime patriotism, and bury a fatal domestic scandal. The targeted quiet closure of the Epstein investigation over a holiday weekend, followed almost immediately by a sudden, aggressive, and widely unpopular pivot to a major infrastructural war in Iran, share a timeline that is highly suspicious to anyone analyzing political self-preservation. When the Attorney General of the United States is facing a bipartisan subpoena that could unravel a global blackmail and trafficking network implicating the highest levels of government, a sudden explosive war is the ultimate distraction.
It is deeply unsettling to consider that the blood of soldiers, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the stability of the global energy economy might simply be the price paid to keep a lid on a domestic scandal.
It forces us to confront a terrifying reality about how institutional power truly operates in the modern era. As the physical infrastructure of the Middle East burns the billion-dollar radar installations, the vital desalination plants, the schools, and the digital infrastructure of truth in Washington is heavily redacted and systematically deleted, we are left with a lingering, profound question.
What is that?
Are we witnessing the collapse of a regime in Tehran, or are we actually watching the collapse of an empire's credibility at home? If the ultimate casualty of war is the truth, what happens to the fabric of a nation when the public realizes the war itself might just be an alibi?
That is a staggering thought to end on, but it is essential that we look reality in the eye and follow the data wherever it leads. So what is the ultimate takeaway? What is the one thing you need to remember for the rest of the week as the headlines continue to spin and the geopolitical map shifts? It is this. The conflict in Iran is absolutely not a contained, successful military operation as the official statements claim. It is a rapidly cascading economic and infrastructural crisis. It is systematically destroying global supply chains. It is catastrophically draining U.S. defense capabilities. And it is potentially serving as a massive bloody smokescreen for explosive domestic political scandals regarding the Epstein files. We will continue to track the hard data, pierce through the managed fog of war, and bring you the unvarnished facts. If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.